The old house smelled of dust and forgotten dreams, a scent that felt both comforting and melancholic to Amelia. At 29, she had nothing left to lose. Her savings were gone, her job was a dead end, and the small apartment she could no longer afford was a daily reminder of her failures. When she saw the listing, an abandoned Victorian for sale for just $500, she didn't hesitate. It was a risk, but it was also a glimmer of hope. The house was a mess of peeling wallpaper and shattered windows. Sunlight streamed through the holes in the roof, illuminating floating motes of dust. As she walked, the floorboards groaned beneath her weight. Near the hearth, one floorboard seemed looser than the rest. Curiosity taking over, she knelt. Her fingers working at the stubborn piece of wood. It creaked upward, revealing a dark, musty space below. Tucked into the dirt was a heavy metal box. Amelia's heart hammered in her chest as she pulled it out, its weight a promise of something more. She pried the lid open, gasping at the contents. The box was filled with gleaming gold coins, wads of old crisp money, and a bundle of yellowed documents tied with a ribbon. But it was the final item that truly caught her attention. A handwritten letter, its ink faded but still legible. The letter was from a woman named Eleanor, dated 1948. It spoke of a desperate promise to her dying husband, a promise to protect their daughter, Lily. But a tragedy had struck, and Lily had been lost in the chaos of a fire. Eleanor, fearing the worst, had buried the treasure, hoping that someone would one day find it and continue her search for her lost child. Amelia's mind reeled. The treasure was enough to change her life, to pay off her debts, fix the house and start over. But the letter, it spoke to her. She saw the same desperation and loneliness she felt, echoed across the years. She could take the money and walk away, leaving the ghosts of the past to rest, or she could use this newfound fortune to fulfill a mother's dying wish. And so the quiet house on the hill became a beacon of a new purpose. As Amelia began her search for Lily, a young woman who would be in her 80s if she were still alive, the old house began to feel less like a project and more like a home. Every document, every clue, every person she spoke to brought her closer to a woman she had never met, and in doing so, brought her closer to finding a piece of herself. Amelia's search began with the documents. The yellowed papers were not just legal deeds and bank statements. They were personal letters, old photographs, and a tattered diary that belonged to Eleanor. The diary became her most valuable resource, a window into a past filled with love, loss, and a desperate struggle to survive. Through Eleanor's words, Amelia learned the full, heartbreaking story. Eleanor and her husband, John, were immigrants who had worked tirelessly to build a new life. The treasure was not a family heirloom, but the result of John's cunning investments and a small fortune he had made in the bustling post-war economy. Their life was simple but rich with love centered around their daughter, Lily. The day of the fire was etched into the pages of the diary, with a pen so hard it had torn the paper. Eleanor had left Lily with a neighbor for a brief errand. When she returned, their house was an inferno. The neighbor, a kind but frail old woman, had tried to rescue Lily but was forced back by the flames. The neighborhood was in chaos, and in the confusion, Lily was never found. The official report said she had perished, but Eleanor's heart refused to believe it. She held on to a shred of hope, clinging to the possibility that Lily had been taken to a hospital or a relative's house, her identity lost in the chaos. Driven by Eleanor's unwavering belief, Amelia pored over every detail. A blurry photograph showed Lily as a young girl, her face half hidden by a sun hat. The diary mentioned a unique locket Lily always wore. Silver bird with a sapphire eye. Amelia realized this was the key. Her first lead came from an old newspaper clipping she found among the documents, detailing the fire and listing the families affected. It mentioned a family that had taken in several displaced children after the fire. Their name was Miller. A quick search of historical records led her to a long-dead Miller family, and a birth record that listed a daughter named Lillian, born around the same time as Lily. It was a long shot, but it was a start. The trail was cold, and many of the people involved were no longer alive. Amelia visited the old neighborhood, now a cluster of modern apartments, and spoke to the few remaining elderly residents. One woman, her memory as sharp as a tack, remembered the Millers. They moved to California, she said, her voice thin with age. Had a little girl they called Lily. She was a quiet thing, always playing with a shiny silver bird on a chain. With this new tantalizing clue, Amelia felt a surge of hope. The gold in the box was no longer just a means to an end. It was a resource to find a woman who had been lost for over 7 decades. She used a portion of the treasure to fund her travels, booking a flight to California. The old dusty house was now her base of operations, filled with maps, historical documents, and the ghosts of a family she was determined to reunite. The journey was long and fraught with dead ends, but Amelia was no longer a struggling woman. She was a seeker of truth, a promise keeper, and a beacon of hope for a family she had never known. The California sunshine felt a world away from the dusty, old house in New England, but Amelia was more focused than ever. She had a name, a location, and a locket, the silver bird with the sapphire eye. Her first stop was the Historical Society in San Francisco, where the Miller family had reportedly settled. The volunteers were kind, but the records were sparse. The Millers had lived a quiet life, their trail growing cold after the 1970s. Just as frustration began to set in, a kind-hearted archivist named Mrs. Davis noticed Amelia's worn-out photograph of Lily. That little girl, Mrs. Davis said, her eyes squinting. She looks so much like a woman who used to volunteer here. A Lillian Miller. Amelia's heart leaped. Is she still around? Mrs. Davis shook her head. No, she passed away a few years ago. But her daughter Julia still lives nearby. She took all of her mother's things, including some old photo albums. You might find what you're looking for there. She handed Amelia a slip of paper with an address. Driving to the address, Amelia's hands were slick with sweat. Could it be this easy? The woman who answered the door was in her late 50s, with a warm smile and her mother's same gentle eyes. Amelia introduced herself and explained her mission, showing Julia the photographs and the newspaper clippings. Julia invited her in, leading her to a room filled with boxes and old memories. Mom never talked much about her childhood, Julia said, pulling out a photo album. She always said she was in a bad accident, when she was little and her family was killed. Amelia's eyes scanned the pages. There was Lillian as a teenager, then as a young woman getting married, and finally as an old woman surrounded by her family. There were photos of a small, smiling girl in a locket, the very locket Amelia had read about in the diary. She always wore this, Julia said, reaching into a small jewelry box and pulling out a silver bird with a missing sapphire eye. She said her mother gave it to her, but that she lost the stone in the fire. It was all there. The story, the locket, the lost identity, Julia explained. That her mother had been a ward of the state for a short time after the fire, before the Millers, a kind and childless couple, adopted her. Lillian had always known. She was adopted but had never known the full truth of what happened to her family. Amelia felt a profound sense of peace. She had found Lily, and with her a family's lost history. The treasure wasn't just gold and money. It was the story of a mother's unbreakable love and a daughter's resilience. The final piece of her mission was to deliver this history to Julia, ensuring that Eleanor's promise to her husband was finally fulfilled. As Amelia prepared to leave, a wave of satisfaction washed over her. The old dusty house was still waiting for her, but now it felt less like a burden and more like a testament to a promise kept. The flight home felt different. Amelia wasn't a desperate woman with a few $100s to her name. She was a keeper of a promise and a bearer of a family's lost legacy. The heavy metal box, now nearly empty of its treasures, sat in her lap, filled with the warmth of accomplishment. Julia had been overwhelmed with gratitude. She had cried and embraced Amelia, thanking her for giving her back a past she never knew she had. Julia had also refused to take any of the treasure, insisting that Amelia was the one who deserved it. Arriving back at the old house, the scent of dust and forgotten dreams had been replaced by the subtle smell of possibility. The peeling wallpaper and broken windows no longer felt like symbols of decay, but like pages in a story waiting to be rewritten. Amelia got to work. She didn't just use the money to fix the house. She used it to honor Eleanor and John's memory. She had the house meticulously restored, careful to preserve its original character. The loose floorboard near the hearth was now a permanent fixture, a secret she would always share with the house. She even had the locket Julia had given her, the one with the missing sapphire, set with a new sparkling stone. She had it made into a necklace and wore it every day. The treasure was more than just money. It had given Amelia a purpose, a reason to get up every day and believe in something bigger than herself. It had led her to a new friend in Julia, and in a way to a new family. The house became a project of passion, A testament to her journey, she hired local craftsmen, pored over historical documents to ensure accuracy in her restoration, and filled the rooms not with expensive furniture, but with the echoes of a family she had come to know so well. On a quiet evening, sitting by the newly repaired hearth, Amelia looked around her new home. It was no longer a symbol of her struggles, but a beacon of hope and a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures are not found in gold or money, but in the promises we keep and the lives we touch. The struggling woman was gone, replaced by someone who had found their fresh start not in an empty house, but in a shared story. Amelia's life became a quiet testament to the power of a single choice. The old house, now meticulously restored, stood as a beacon on the hill, no longer a symbol of her desperation, but a monument to a promise kept. She had found more than just a home. She had found a purpose. She never became rich in the way she had once imagined, but she was fulfilled in a way she never thought possible. The treasure was not what made her whole. It was the journey it had set her on. She had honored the memory of a family she had never met, and in doing so, had finally found her own place in the world. The struggling woman who had bought a derelict house for $500 was gone. In her place was a woman who was finally at peace, surrounded by the echoes of a past she had helped bring to light, and with a future as solid and hopeful as the house she had rebuilt.